Imagine being left alone in the middle of the night, abandoned by the very person who was supposed to love you the most. What would you do? How would you survive? As we unravel this chilling story, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you don't want to miss tomorrow's special story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. More thrilling tales are on the way, and you won't want to be left behind, just like our protagonist. A millionaire left his disabled son to die. But fate had other plans. The rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the sleek black sedan as it sped down the desolate forest road. The wipers struggled to keep up, smearing water across the windshield. Jonathan Hayes, a powerful real estate mogul, gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. His face was cold, unreadable, but inside, a storm raged. He had made his decision. There was no turning back. In the back seat, 3-year-old Caleb sat curled up, his small body trembling. His hands clutched the fabric of his thin jacket as his wide, innocent eyes darted around in confusion. He didn't understand why his father was driving so fast. He didn't understand why they had left home in such a hurry, in the middle of the night. But most of all, he didn't understand why his father hadn't said a single word to him since they got in the car. "Daddy?" Caleb's voice was small, almost swallowed by the roar of the storm outside. No response. His tiny fingers gripped the edge of his seat as he tried again. "Where are we going?" Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. His foot pressed harder on the gas. The headlights barely cut through the dense fog, casting eerie shadows on the towering trees ahead. Minutes passed in silence before the car suddenly skidded to a stop. The tires dug into the mud, sending a spray of wet earth onto the surrounding bushes. The engine hummed in the heavy silence. Jonathan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He opened the door, stepping out into the rain. The freezing air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. His mind was locked on what had to be done. He walked to the back door and yanked it open. Caleb blinked up at him, confused. "Daddy?" "Get out of the car," Jonathan ordered, his voice devoid of warmth. The little boy hesitated. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. "I don't want to," he whispered. "It's scary." Jonathan's patience was wearing thin. He reached in, grabbing the child by the arm and pulling him out. Caleb stumbled, his small bare feet sinking into the wet, icy ground. His heart pounded. "Stay here." The words cut through the rain like a blade. Caleb's breath hitched. His lip quivered as he clung to his father's hand. "No. Please, Daddy. Don't leave me." But Jonathan yanked his hand away. "Don't call me that," he said coldly. And then, without another glance, he turned and walked back to the car. "Daddy. No. Please." Caleb screamed, running after him. But it was too late. The door slammed shut. The engine roared. And then, Jonathan Hayes was gone. The roar of the engine faded into the distance, swallowed by the howling wind. Caleb stood frozen, his small body drenched in rain, his bare feet sinking into the freezing mud. His tiny chest rose and fell in ragged gasps as he stared down the empty road. He waited, convinced his father would return. Any second now. Any moment. But the only thing that came was silence. A sob escaped his lips. "Daddy?" His voice was barely a whisper against the storm. He turned in circles, his wide, fearful eyes scanning the towering trees around him. The forest was dark, too dark. Shadows stretched across the ground, shifting with every flicker of lightning. The rain stung his skin like tiny needles, and the cold had begun to seep into his bones. Caleb wrapped his arms around himself, shivering violently. He didn't understand. Why had his father left him here? What had he done wrong? His stomach twisted, not just from hunger, but from fear. He wanted to move, to run, but he didn't know which way to go. His father had always told him to stay put if he got lost. If he waited, someone would find him. But no one was coming. A rustling noise broke through the sound of the storm. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He whipped around, his heart pounding. From the darkness of the trees, something was moving. Two glowing eyes appeared between the trunks. A wolf. Caleb's pulse thundered in his ears. The animal was large, its sleek gray fur soaked from the rain, its golden eyes locked onto him. It didn't move. It just watched. Caleb didn't dare breathe. He knew what wolves were. He had seen them in books. He knew they were fast, strong, and dangerous. If it attacked, he wouldn't stand a chance. A deep growl rumbled through the air. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the wolf turned away. It vanished into the trees, leaving Caleb standing there, trembling, barely able to hold himself up. His legs gave out, and he collapsed into the mud. He was so cold. So tired. Curling up beneath a fallen tree, he pulled his knees to his chest. The rain kept falling, the wind kept howling, but no one came. And for the first time in his life, Caleb understood what it meant to be truly alone. Caleb never remembered falling asleep that night. One moment, he was curled under the tree, shivering, his body too weak to move. The next, he woke to the harsh rays of the morning sun piercing through the trees. His entire body ached. His small hands were caked in mud, his clothes soaked and stiff from the cold. His stomach twisted with hunger, the pain so sharp it made him dizzy. He had to find food. Dragging himself to his feet, he stumbled through the forest, his tiny legs barely able to hold him up. His bare feet scraped against rocks and twigs, leaving behind small streaks of blood. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Then, he heard it, hooves clopping against the dirt road. His head snapped up just in time to see a horse-drawn wagon approaching. It was driven by a rough-looking man with messy dark curls and a scruffy beard. His sharp eyes peeked out from beneath the brim of his worn-out hat. The man pulled on the reins, bringing the horse to a halt. He tilted his head, frowning as he took in the sight of the filthy, barefoot child standing in the middle of the road. Well, the man said, his voice dripping with something Caleb couldn't quite place. What do we have here? Caleb didn't respond. He was too weak, too hungry. His lips parted, but no words came out. The man jumped down from the wagon and crouched in front of him. You look half dead, kid. What are you doing all the way out here by yourself? He studied Caleb closely, eyes narrowing. No one comes looking for you, huh? Silence. A slow smile crept across the man's face. You hungry? Caleb's stomach answered for him, letting out a loud, painful growl. The man chuckled. Come on, Ben. He reached out, lifting Caleb effortlessly into the wagon. Too tired to resist, Caleb let himself be carried. But as the wagon rolled away, he had no idea he had just traded one nightmare for another. The man's name was Vincent Carter, and he wasn't a rescuer. He was a drifter, a con man, a criminal. And to him, a nameless, abandoned child was the perfect pawn. And so, Caleb's real battle for survival had just begun. Years passed. Caleb was no longer the weak, abandoned child left to die in the rain. He had survived. He had learned. And most importantly, he had changed. Under Vincent Carter's control, he grew up navigating the dark corners of society. By 18, he was no longer just a desperate boy scavenging for food. He was a thief, a hustler, a ghost in the streets of Chicago. He had learned how to move unnoticed, how to slip through crowds, how to take what he needed without getting caught. But no matter how much he adapted, one thing never changed. The hatred. It sat in his chest, burning like a fire that would never go out. The memory of that night, of the rain, of his father's cold voice telling him not to call him daddy. It haunted him. No matter how many people he fooled, how many marks he conned, he could never outrun the past. And then, one night, everything changed. While searching through Vincent's collection of stolen documents, Caleb came across a familiar name. Jonathan Hayes. His hands shook as he flipped through the pages. His father. Not only was he still alive, but he was thriving. The man who left him in the forest had built a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions. He lived in a massive 10,000 square foot mansion in Los Angeles, surrounded by wealth, luxury, and power. Meanwhile, Caleb had spent his entire life clawing his way through the filth. His pulse thundered in his ears. That night, Caleb walked away from Vincent's crew without a word. He had one goal now. He was going to make Jonathan Hayes pay. 1 year later, Jonathan sat in his grand office, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The fireplace crackled, but it did little to warm the unease creeping through his veins. For weeks, things had been going wrong. His investments were failing. His stocks were plummeting. His competitors were getting their hands on confidential deals. And then, earlier that evening, he received the black envelope. Inside was a photograph. An old picture of a 3-year-old boy. His hands trembled as he turned it over. Scrawled in red ink were 4 chilling words. Best dad in the world. Jonathan's breath caught. His vision blurred. Then, his phone rang. He swallowed hard, his hands clammy as he picked it up. A long silence. Then, a voice, deep, slow, filled with ice. "Hello, Father." Jonathan's grip on the phone tightened. His throat was dry. His heart pounded against his ribs. The voice on the other end sent a chill down his spine, a voice he hadn't heard in over 30 years. Who is this?" he demanded, though deep down, he already knew. A low chuckle crackled through the line. Cold. Amused. Dangerous. "You don't recognize your own son?" Jonathan's breath hitched. Impossible. Caleb was dead. He had left him in the middle of the woods. Alone. No child could have survived that. He forced himself to stay calm. This had to be a sick joke. "If you think you can scare me, you're wasting your time." Another chuckle. But this time, there was something else in the voice. Satisfaction. "Oh, I'm not here to scare you, Father." The word dripped with venom. "I'm here to destroy you." The line went dead. Jonathan shot up from his chair, knocking over his glass of whiskey. His hands trembled as he turned toward the large windows of his study. Outside, through the rain, a figure stood at the gates. Drenched, motionless, staring up at the house. Watching him. "Security," he barked, his voice cracking. His head bodyguard, Mark, rushed in. "Sir?" Jonathan pointed to the window, his breathing ragged. "There's someone outside." "Right there." Mark frowned, stepping closer. But there was nothing there. Jonathan's stomach twisted. He was losing his mind. He turned back to his desk, but something else caught his eye, a second black envelope. He hadn't seen it before. His blood ran cold as he picked it up. Inside was a single note, typed in bold letters. "This is only the beginning." The fall of a giant. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan's life unraveled before his eyes. Millions vanished overnight. Bank accounts frozen. Scandals leaked to the press. Former allies turned their backs on him. The empire he had spent decades building collapsed like a house of cards. It wasn't just bad luck. Someone was orchestrating this. And he knew exactly who. Then, one night, Caleb finally stepped out of the shadows. Jonathan stared at the man before him. His son. No longer a helpless child, but a predator. Cold. Ruthless. Jonathan fell to his knees, his voice shaking. "Please. I made a mistake. I regret everything." Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not here to kill you, Father." His voice was calm. Unshaken. "I just wanted you to understand what it feels like to be abandoned." And with that, he turned and walked away. Jonathan Hayes had everything, until he had nothing. What would you do if the person who was supposed to love you the most abandoned you? Imagine being left in the middle of the night, in the freezing rain, knowing no one was coming back for you. Could you survive? Could you rise from nothing and face the one who betrayed you? Caleb's journey is one of pain, strength, and revenge, but was it all worth it? What do you think? Do you believe Caleb was right in making his father suffer, or should he have chosen forgiveness? We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Caleb's place? Do you think Jonathan truly deserved everything that happened to him? Let us know in the comments below. And before you go, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We love seeing how far our stories reach. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow's story will be even more intense. You won't want to miss it.